OpenAI, the company, has got nothing to do with open source AI. They started as a company, as an advocate for open source AI, but now they are the polar opposite. In fact, maybe after Anthropic, they are the second least open source company in the AI world.
Did you know there are 3 key categories of large language models? And within those, there are again thousands of models working with that ecosystem. In today's AI Curiosity, we're going to talk about different categories of AIs and the models within them. I'm Nasim Salehi, Professor of Healthcare Innovations, and we have Amir Zahedi, who has 2 decades of experience in technology and AI. Amir.
Well, not 2 decades in AI, but yes.
Yeah, technology. Amir, can we start with the 3 key categories of large language models? How you distinguish that for our audiences?
When we are categorizing this time, it's about access and availability. In terms of access and availability, there are largely 2 types. We have open source models and we have closed source models. Within the open source models, there are different categories. It can be open weight or fully open source, but let's simplify that and just say open source to encompass all of them. But also open source models themselves can be categorized into frontier level open source models and local open source models. There is a lot of chat about local models these days, and we will get to them as well.
Okay. Thank you. And now the way we define open source AI versus local and closed AIs. Can you define them and distinguish them more clearly?
So most of the AI people work with are closed source frontier models. Let's say what you're working with, your ChatGPTs, your Gemini, Claude, they're all closed source proprietary frontier models that everyone works with. No one has access to their source material, no one has access to their training material or their model weights themselves. But there are a lot of new and emerging, really, really highly capable open source models now, open weight models now, which are almost getting as good as the frontier level, if not better sometimes. Kimi K3 was just released. In some benchmarks, it's actually beating the best of the proprietary models, which is exciting. And yes, the frontier models in open source land are moving really fast. But there is also good movement on the local side as well.
Right. Amir, can we use this analogy of cake? Let's say healthy cake, okay? For open source AI versus closed AI. For example, for open source AI, can we say that the ingredients of the healthy cake, such as fresh fruits, dry fruits, almond flour, nuts, etc., will be given to you and you create your own cake? But for closed AI, they make the healthy cake for you and they're gonna give it to you. Do you think this analogy is right? I'm not AI expert, but I need to use analogy to understand it.
I think it's kind of accurate, but it lacks a little bit. Maybe it's better to say open source AI would be a mixed cake that you buy from a supermarket. Okay. You take it home, it's already mixed. If you wanted to, you can add ingredients, but you have the option of cooking how you want it, where you want it, when you want it. Versus the cake that comes to you in a restaurant as a dessert after your meal in a dish, and you just consume it the way it is. You have no input whatsoever. It can be a beautiful dessert, and more often than not it is, but you do not have any access to any changes to those cakes. So that's where I think that's a better analogy.
What about local AI?
So local AI is again a type of open source AI or open weight AI at least. But the difference is with the local ones, a consumer should be able to go and purchase consumer level hardware and run it locally in their own home or in their own office. Now, I'm not saying you can necessarily run it on your computer, but you can definitely run some of them. But some of them, at least you should be able to go to any consumer hardware store, purchase the hardware, and then run it in your own office or in your own home, and you have full access to it. You don't even need internet to run them. You can be fully offline in your airplane and you're running it on your laptop, and you don't even need access to it. So the analogy for that one can also be something like between the frontier level open source model and local model would be, let's think of your local model as the IKEA furniture.
Okay.
So you are assembling this, let's say, dining table, an IKEA furniture dining table, an IKEA dining table. Anyone with some availability in terms of reading the instructions as well as a little bit of tools can assemble an IKEA table. It's available to large parts of population. Versus, let's say you have this beautiful black walnut custom-made dining table that needs a lot of carpentry tools as well as a master carpenter to build. On paper, you could do it, but you don't have the tools or the skills to do it. The walnut is there for you if you want. You can purchase the walnut and you can run it. So that's the difference. So the frontier level open source models, you would still be using them from someone else who is hosting them in a large data center. You cannot feasibly run them at home.
Right.
And if you wanted to, you would be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow. Amir, am I right that most of the organizations, they actually use closed AI categories?
Largely, you can say in terms of large language models, yes, but it's also changing as well. When it comes to data sovereignty, for example, some companies have no option other than using some of these open source, open weight models as well. So it started with being largely proprietary closed source models. And I think the shift is more and more not away from them into a balanced mode where what do we need the absolute best closed source model for? What can we just do with an open source model? And where do we absolutely can only use open source model because there is privacy issues and data sovereignty issues.
If you want to use universities as an example, what kinds of categories they use? Can I say closed AI? Like big
That's my
organizations?
understanding. My understanding is a lot of the universities are very heavily into the Microsoft ecosystem, and they use Copilot, and Copilot is GPT models, which is the OpenAI's GPT model. And that's also a confusing, probably, term for a lot of people. OpenAI, the company, has got nothing to do with open source AI. They started as a company, as an advocate for open source AI, but now they are the polar opposite, in fact. Maybe after Anthropic, they are the second least open source company in the AI world. Even less than Google.
That's very interesting.
At least, I mean, in fact, Google has really good open source models.
When we compare these three categories of AIs in terms of evolution and future, where are we going? Would there be a balanced approach across those three, or we are moving towards one of them more, and why?
I think all three, there is a room for all three. I personally have all three running all the time almost. I have my local models running all the time, my local LLMs, but mostly my local voice models and text-to-speech models. These are consumer level. I also have Gemma 4 running, doing some really good tasks for me locally, as well as, obviously, when it comes to more sophisticated coding work, for example, it is closed source proprietary models.
Amir, in terms of expenses, which one of these categories could be more expensive? Is my assumption right that open source AI could be less expensive?
Directionally, yes, that's spot on. Having said that, it depends on the model, the size of the model, and the capability of the model. There are closed source models that would be cheaper than some open source models. But for the same capability, for the same size of the model, you can always expect the open source model to be almost sometimes radically cheaper than the closed source model equivalent.
And why?
Part of it is because there would be competition on providing those models. With closed source model, the company who's developed the model, they are the only provider. Or if there are other providers, they are always being charged the same pricing as the company themselves provided. So the price is fixed. Whereas for open source models, open weight models, anyone can provide those models. So there would be some level of competition between model providers. But it's also the fact that the companies who do open source largely try to make it be cheaper because that's their selling point.
Sure. Amir, let's go back again to the categories versus models. We have those three categories: open source AI, closed AI, and local. But then we may have thousands of models within that ecosystem. Can you quickly give us some examples of those models? And do you think it's going to be like social media platforms that is just emerging and increasing, and there are so many variations in terms of social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about large language models because within the models themselves, there are different types of models. But within large language models, yes, there are closed source models. There are most of what you know, again, all of the GPTs in your chat GPT, Gemini in your Gemini and Google phones, as well as now Apple is using Gemini as well. So the new Siri is using Google's Gemini.
Copilot.
Copilot is using GPT, and Claude is getting really big now as well. They are all closed source models. There is more, obviously. They're not the only ones. In terms of open source, though, the variety is almost mind-boggling. Thousands and thousands of open source models there is now available. Some of them are just smaller for specific niche tasks. But in terms of more generic, more capable, larger models, there is really, really good competition right now. The best competition is right now between Chinese models and some of the NVIDIA models, but mostly the Chinese model. The Kimi family, the GLM family, as well as DeepSeek is still really good. Also, Google's Gemma family are really good. They are more towards the local model, but there is also like bigger size Gemmas as well.
Amir, I'm just curious if you yourself personally using variations and multiple of those models. If yes, why? I assume because of your working situation, because you are a tech person. For example, I'm more Gemini. What about you? Because of your job, you may use variations. What is the reason?
Well, we use everything there is under the sun. Obviously, I use Gemini as well on my phone. That's just handy. It's good model. It does the work. For work, for coding, most of us are using a lot of the Claude family models. But in terms of the products that we develop, we use Claude family, we use GPT family, but we also use Open family. We even use some of the Chinese models that are hosted inside Australia as well. So those are Chinese open source models, but they're hosted right here in Australia with an Australian provider. But more and more we are adopting open source, but locally hosted models, locally or at least Western hosted models we are adopting. But personally, I'm also running a number of local AIs as well. Most of them are not, some of them are not LLMs, they are voice models, which I use to communicate back and forth with my coding tools. But I also used a lot of Gemma 4 and some DeepSeek as well. I run it locally. But these days, Gemma 4 is my go-to local model because it's really capable model. It is multi-modal model. It has vision built in, very fast. There's not a lot of local models that have vision with that capability built in. When I say vision, it's not that they look at you, but you can feed them pictures. Like you can send a screenshot and it could analyze the screenshot and give you the report back, for example.
Okay. Amir, because you are a tech person, you are using all these variations. What about general public people? Do you suggest using variations because of the strength and weaknesses of each, that they can complement each other, or do you think we need to stay consistent?
I do think everyone benefits from a larger ecosystem that is thriving. If we support open source models, it's going to obviously make open source models better, but also the competition that they bring into the field makes your closed source models also better, because competition, everyone's winning, and the prices will drop. Right now, it is a fun fact that because Kimi dropped Kimi K3, both OpenAI and Anthropic, they wouldn't say it, but they have introduced some discounts and some increased quota for the most part as a response to that.
Right.
They don't say it, but my belief anyway. So it's good. The competition is good. And if you work in a field that is not very sensitive, you could definitely use some of the even Chinese hosted models. If you're happy to use Kimi K3 Chinese hosted, you can use it. And that's a brilliant model, better than all of the GPTs that normal consumers use right now. There is good GPTs, but normal consumers that are not in paid plans would not be able to access them.
Even I haven't heard about it. What was the name again?
Kimi K3 is the latest one.
Is it popular?
Within tech circles, it's like it's a bombshell right now. They dropped it, and that actually is beating the best of the best of the best in some aspects, but at least is on par with things like Fable and even GPT Soul.
Right. Amir, do you have any take-home message for audiences, including organizations and individuals, in terms of using those three large language categories?
Yep, there is room for all three, and have an open mind and do your research when you are planning. Do not just assume you're going to GPTs, you're going to Claudes. Plan and see if GPT and Claude are the best for the task. Obviously, go for it. But if there are other options, have that open mind.
Great. Thank you very much, Amir.
Thank you.